So I was thinking a lot as I do in my day-to-day time, and I was thinking a lot about arguments because arguments are a big factor of human interaction. Because whether it's like between two individuals or two parties of people, or just like when you're thinking and then you think of an argument and whatever, it just happens on your own. Arguments happen a lot, and conflicts between people happen a lot. But I kind of wanted to go over mistakes that people make when they go into an argument, or just factors that affect an argument causing the argument to happen in the first place. But in terms of mistakes, I think the biggest one that people make that I've made in the past is taking a side too quickly without properly considering the opposing view. Because when I used to enter like an argument and I just hear the sides, I hear the surface argument, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go with the one that sounds more correct. And then I'd take this argument, defend the argument, and then my brother would come over and be like, this is invalid because X, Y, Z. There's reasons to believe that, but there's also reasons to believe the other argument. And then I realize I'm like, I guess there is a valid reason to believe the other argument too. And it's situational, but I feel like a lot of people, it doesn't hurt to try to consider the other argument, because when you enter a new argument, people just take sides super fast, or they say, oh, this one is valid in its own sense, I'm going to disregard the other one, I'm just going to say it's wrong because mine is right, yours is wrong, that's just the easiest way to go. But when I enter now, I would hope I'm better at doing this now so I can speak about it, but when I enter an argument now, I try to like take both parties and then figure out why one party would believe this argument and then why the other party believes that argument, and then just understand both sides and then make my argument based off my own like values and standards. Because like there's a reason to have an argument, it's ultimately down to your own values and standards, but you need to first understand both sides. And I think that's the biggest mistake that people don't do. People don't properly assess the situation, and they're too hasty, I guess. But I guess that's normal, and I also did do this before, so I can't really be talking. But I hope I'm better at it now so that I can actually speak about it. But anyways, that's a big mistake that I think people make. But in terms of factors that actually like affect what causes an argument, a big thing is definitely just your experience, because everyone, realistically, when you think about it, everyone has a brain, everyone's human, so you'd think everyone wouldn't argue about anything. You're like, okay, we're all reasoning as humans. We're not stupid. We all have a brain and we all come to the same logical conclusion, right? We should all think the same thing. But that's just not the case, because ultimately I think what separates people's thought processes the most is how they're raised, and just basically how they were like raised combined with their past experiences, just everything that led up to who they are in the moment that shapes how they think about something. Because for example, if there's an argument where one guy says, I think all dogs are violent and awful animals, and then another person can say, I believe all dogs are cute, adorable creatures that show extreme love and they're the best. Now, these are conflicting arguments, and you can take a side in this argument, but you could say, like, a hidden factor in this could be the experience of, person A who says they're all violent. He could have experienced dogs in his life who are like just all bite him and are all just attacking him, and he could be like, okay, my conclusion based off my experience is that all dogs are violent. And then person B is like, okay, all dogs are loving creatures. His only experience with dogs are the dogs that just all like lick him off the rip and then just like don't do anything violent. So both sides are perfectly like valid to believe their argument, and it's just, you can't really say a side is wrong per se just because they're both based off their own experience. But like it's just ultimately experience that separates people's arguments and can cause the disconnect in the first place. And then another thing is like perspective, in a sense, because when two people experience the same thing, one person can perceive it one way, another person can perceive it another way. That's called a disconnect. I'm just making up terms, but in that type of scenario, it's just down to perspective. One person can perceive it one way differently from the other person, and then they experienced the same thing but perceived it differently, and then there's just a disconnect in the argument. I don't have an example for that. It's just like a thing that can happen naturally. But overall, down to like the core, I think arguments are based off of just completely your moral standards and just like your views in general. Because especially when you when you come down to like things like color, and you say the best color is black, and then someone else says the best color is green, there's no solution to this argument. That's just purely preference. And down to the core, I think it's that same idea that applies to every argument at its core. There's like elements that you can shave off that don't really matter, but at its core, it's just your own personal values and standards compared to a different value and standards. And like with arguments that have lasted a long time, when you look at like political parties or all that stuff, you realize that if the arguments lasted that long and there's two huge parties that conflict and they've conflicted for a long time, most likely there's no solution to this. It's just values and standards. But overall, that's just my thoughts on arguments. I've been like in the thinking mode recently, and I just decided to think about like what makes an argument, what makes people think an argument, and overall. Basically, to sum it all up, a big mistake people make when they enter an argument is just, not fully taking into consideration both parties, and then just like being more aware of both sides of the argument in general. And then things that affect people's arguments is definitely their experience as well as their perception. And then overall, down to the core, it's literally just your own personal values that are, what you believe, what you value, your morals, whatever you want to call it. That's just what causes an argument in the first place. But that's pretty much what I think about arguments. Yeah, I was kind of bored today.